Okay, the point of this video is to demonstrate the dramatic productivity of Rebol code. You can go to rebelforum.com and click on this short code examples link. That'll bring up a page of about 80 examples of Rebol code. To get started, click on this URL or copy and paste it. That'll bring up this page where you can download Rebol View. Rebol View contains graphics and sound and all the other components you need to build desktop applications. Download the appropriate version for your operating system, and you can see it is tiny. It's typically about a half a meg. On Windows, the biggest distribution here is still under a meg, about 4/5 of a meg. There are some older versions down here. If you want to run it, for example, on an Amiga or on an older Apple machine. There are even some versions of the core Rebol processor for things like Windows CE and QNX. So you can run this on all the modern desktop operating systems and also on a full set of legacy systems. There are some versions of Rebol 3 also for things like Raspberry Pi. There's an Android version with graphics and all. But we're going to stick with Rebol 2 for this tutorial. It's the old and well-established version of Rebol, which has been around for about 17 or 18 years now. Okay, so there are a bunch of ways you can get started. When you download Rebol View, you're actually going to see something that looks like this. This desktop comes up the very first time. Click on the user menu and be sure to uncheck this open desktop on startup. It will be checked by default, and we don't really need the desktop now. The desktop has a bunch of really interesting features, but we don't need them to do most of the Rebol coding chores, and we want to get right to the console. You can also do some things like set your proxy settings and your email settings, but you don't need to. You can do all that stuff directly in code. Just make sure you uncheck this open desktop on startup option. And then that keeps you from having to click on this console icon every time. So now when you start Rebol, every time it will start up and look like this. That gives you a place where you can type in code, and you can also just paste these examples in. And before we get started, I just want to really quickly go through the point of Rebol. Rebol was made to be the most productive, lightest weight, and simplest to use development tool. It was made nearly 20 years ago, and it's still a dramatic example of productive development tooling. Everything that you need comes in that little half meg download. You don't need to have an IDE, you don't need to have a GUI builder or libraries or any other heavy tooling. Everything you need as far as libraries is included and all integrated into the little tiny half meg executable. So when you look at these examples, you're not only looking at a little bit of code that makes the system run, you're looking at the user interface code directly in the code. You don't need an IDE or a GUI builder to build this. You don't need any other components to run. So these examples represent the full scope of all the tooling, the full scope of understanding, the full scope of all the work that goes into developing these applications. You don't have to slide things around on a GUI interface, and there are no other heavy tools. The fact that Rebol is so tiny and includes all of the user interface network, graphics, sound, math, compression, email, CGI, security, database, network protocols, built-in help, all of that comes in about a half a meg. And that's a real testament to just how dramatically productive Rebol code is, because all the internals of Rebol are built on itself. So when you're looking at these things, you should be aware that the actual work is far less. And these are small examples. We'll get to some fairly interesting examples here, but the work that you need to do in the end in Rebol is always dramatically small compared to any other development systems. There are things like live code, which make it really easy to get started, and learning tools. But Rebel is a real powerful development system. It's super lightweight, so everything you build can be really quickly implemented anywhere. It runs the same on every operating system, so it's just dramatically productive. You can look at places like Rosetta Code and see that examples are always very, very, very short in Rebel. And as you see, these 80 or so examples we're going to run through cover a huge variety of applications, network applications and graphics applications and typical CRUD applications and all sorts of sound applications, everything you can imagine, data parsing applications, and very often those are just a couple lines. And that effect is multiplied dramatically, exponentially, as you get into bigger applications. Down at the bottom here, I've created software for over 15 years now and written a lot about how and why Rebel is productive with lots of real-world examples. This little businessprogramming.com site really goes into it in depth. It's about 800 pages. You can see this application that I wrote. It's called Free Consignment Software. That's one of the top consignment softwares around on the web, and the absolute number one for consignment software. If you go to Google and look up consignment software or open source consignment software, you'll see it's the first couple pages of results for open source consignment software. And that's a really big application. I ran a place called Merchants Village. We bought an old Walmart building and turned it into the country's biggest consignment shop, and that was the software we used to sell millions of items. And it ran everything from the point of sale to the security cameras to all of our time tracking and our payroll, and it wrote the checks for us, and it did all the inventorying, and it printed barcode labels for us, and it tracked our rent, and all of that was done in a few thousand lines of Rebel code, using any other big system that would have been 100 times the work. So some of these examples are to give you a taste of just how dramatically productive Rebel can be. And you can read all these other examples here. I wrote an article about why you might want to use Rebel. This goes into the details of exactly what it is about Rebel that makes it so ridiculously productive and why it's so small. And there are things that aren't found in other languages. The fact that we have 40 some odd data types, so not just characters and numbers, but things like time and times and dates and IP addresses, tuples, and you can do things like adding and subtracting graphics coordinates, all natively. All the types of data that actually make up the world around us. Things like colors, you have color data types in Rebel. So those things are managed without any extra formatting, and you don't need libraries to handle them. So all the things that happen in the natural world are really largely covered by those data types, and the things that you're always going to be dealing with in programming are built into the language. The data format in Rebel is one basic data format. It's called the series, and you use that to create any kind of data structure that you need. And the functions that you use to deal with series work across the board for every sort of data implementation that you're going to be dealing with. So if you're dealing with a network port and data coming from a network port, or if you're dealing with a file system, or if you're dealing with the sound system, or if you're dealing with any other sort of data source, you can connect to it the exact same way. You can read and write to network ports. You can read and write to port, a protocol on the internet, an email account. You can just as easily write to an FTP server, and so on. And when you're dealing with, for example, graphics, the draw dialect in Rebel uses the same sort of series operations and the same functions. So there's a very small learning curve, and that's not apparent if you're coming from another language because you just see some code written. there are a lot more features about the language, and it's not just Rebelers that understand that. You'll see on this page about why Rebel, there was a study done by the very well-respected site Red Monk, in which Rebel was determined to be the most productive language around. And if you use it for a while, you'll see that truly is the case. I've been writing code now I'm 44. I've been writing code since I was 7 years old, and I went to school, and back in the 1990s when I went to school, and we were studying C and we were studying Lisp. And I've been around through Visual Basic. I have some Visual Basic programs that I'm running for more than 20 years in businesses, and I've done just about every sort of development work you can imagine. And Rebel is truly a unique system. It eliminates all the many layers of bloated infrastructure that other systems use. So even JavaScript relies on a heavy engine. Rebel is entirely self-contained, and the new version Red is going to provide even more low-level features along with the high-level features. So there's a lot of benefit to doing work in Rebel. I'm going to show you how to get this stuff working now. Go to the first example here, and we'll just copy and paste this example. You can take any of these examples and paste them into the Rebel interpreter. So that first one was pasted in, you can see, into the interpreter, into the console. And this is just a little sliding tile puzzle game. Again, all of this user interface, the buttons, the color, the action, the actual code that makes this run, including the user interface itself, is included in those two little lines of code. So this view layout thing you'll see in most of the applications is what creates the user interface, and then this little style creates a new type of control that we can put into the layout, and then we have a bunch of those laid out on the second line. We'll do another example like that. Just pop that into the Rebel interpreter. I am on a tablet here, so I apologize. This is a bit awkward to work with. Pop this into the interpreter, and you can see I'm running that every time. That's how long it takes to come up. And this example, it's just a little text editor. What it does is allows you to type. Just type some random stuff in here, and you can save the file, and I'll call this test, and it lets you know it's done. And then later on, if we want to run that again, we can run the application again, and it'll load the text. So I'm going to get the test file here, and you can bring it back up. And you can see this code has some error checking built in. This little word attempt will catch the errors. So for example, if that file didn't load, if it didn't exist, and that little barely 4-line program is the full implementation of a tiny little text editor. One of the other ways you can make these applications run, there are a bunch of ways, but you can copy and paste this into any, of course we can go back into the interpreter, but we can copy and paste this into any text editor. You could even use Notepad if you wanted. I'm using Metapad here, but any other application like Ultra Edit or Notepad++, any of those will work. And you can save the file as any sort of file. We'll put this on our desktop, and we'll call this to-do.r. Run it, and if you save it with the .r extension, it will run as if it's an executable. If you've installed Rebel on the system, if you go through just downloading it, installing it, if you do install Rebel, install it as the administrator. And so now I have a little file. This is just the text of that program stored in a file with the name ending in .r. You can click on that, and it'll run like any other executable program in Windows. This is just a little to-do list, so let's just put a couple things in. And what this lets us do, I'll just type in some random text here so you can see it work. Lets us add and remove things from the to-do list. If you click on them, they get deleted. I'll type them in down here. They're added, and if you click save, it's saved to a file called to-do.txt. And if you run this again later on, you can load that file, and it will bring up all your to-do list. So a typical little kind of CRUD application. Again, just takes a couple lines of code, a few lines of code. So most of these editors will allow you to add an external viewer, and so here you can see I've got my Rebol interpreter added. So in Metapad, just like in a lot of these other editors, you can actually run your code directly in the editor without having to save it to a file and click on it. But this little way of transporting applications, of distributing the applications and letting users use them is really simple. Just have them download the tiny interpreter and then download your scripts that are ending with a file name that ends in .r, and you can really quickly get them to be installed. You don't really have to package them as exes, although you can. And since the Rebol interpreter is so small, you'll get a very, very tiny packaged application. Okay, so another way that you can get these things running is directly in Rebol. There is an editor. You type in editor none, and we're going to open the editor with no file. You can paste the code directly in there, and I've got this editor right now made really small because I'm going to do some things later where we're going to have passwords. I'm going to keep the passwords from being shown. But you can run this, and if you press the F5 key, it will save the file and run the application. So here's a little bar chart maker in 2 lines of code. The first line of code is the data, and the second line of code creates a user interface and appends all that data to the user interface in the form of some buttons, and then views that layout. So again, you just open the editor by going to the Rebol console, typing into the Rebol console editor none, and then pressing the F5 key, and that'll run your application. So you don't need any external editor. And if you look through that business programming tutorial, there's some explanation about a file you can download that'll help you really improve the way the built-in editor works. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy this entire thing, whole rest of the page. We'll stick that into the Rebol editor, and we'll run the rest of these applications as quickly as possible and get through this as quickly as possible. So I'm going to paste that, and I'm going to delete out the things that we're not going to use. Let's see here. Just delete out the ones we've already done here. And as we go, some of these applications are going to close the interpreter, and we'll have to redo this, but I'm going to save that by default to temp.txt, and then I'm going to control F5. And this next little application is a Madlib maker. You can see it's got about 5 lines of code, and this is a fully implemented Madlib maker. You can type the words you want into pointy brackets, and this will ask you for all the words that were included inside pointy brackets, and then it creates the Madlib for you and displays it. And this is a fully configurable Madlib maker. You can type whatever you want to that user interface, make a new Madlib, and run it. So what we're doing now is, since I've run this entire file, we're running all of the pieces of code here. So I'm going to go through each of these examples and get back to running the examples. So this next example is a pig Latin generator. So can see this creates Pig Latin. That's about 4 lines of code. Actually, it's really only about 3 lines of code. Both of those previous examples use Rebel's parse. Parse is one of the absolute unique and useful things in Rebel. Parse can be used to do simple splitting, like a splitting of text, but it's an extremely powerful dialect which allows you to search and sort of mine through text based on rules. You can see in this we're just going from characters through other characters and copying the bits of text between, but it's an extremely powerful tool that replaces regex in general, and it's very readable, and it's also faster than regex. So a lot of people that use Rebel tend to use Rebel just for parse. I'm deleting some of these as we do them. Parse is extremely powerful and really unique. Okay, let's get back to that. Application. Here we go. Okay, so I'm pressing enter to continue, and the next thing is a calculator. And so this calculator is fully functional, typical calculator example. And you can see in code that example is, again, just a few lines of code. There's again a layout, a style, a button style that's created, and then a whole bunch of those buttons added to the layout. And then when you press the equals key, it runs this little bit of text, which basically executes the text that's in that screen in the field. And this is artificially constrained to doing math. We could actually type some code in here and have it run if we wanted to do a bit of code. This is actually much more powerful than it appears. Let's do this. If I type equal, it'll actually run that code that was created. Okay, so the next example here is a calendar, and give us a little calendar selector, and we can type in something we want for that day. Save it, go to another day, and here we'll just type in some random text. And then when you bring up these days again, you'll see that those things have been saved. Again, just a few lines of code. When I click out of this, it's going to go to the next example. The few lines of code here basically save all this data to a file. If you wanted to move that application to another computer or another device, you just copy this program, the program source code, install Rebel, and copy your data file. And that's it. Doesn't need a database. Rebel is fantastic that way. Very often Rebel applications are created without any database. There's one of my tutorials you'll see in the bottom shows how you can create multi-user applications without needing a database system at all. Get rid of these as we go. Okay, so we're done with the calendar application. And the next little application here looks like, okay, so that calendar application closed the program. So I'm going to run this program file again. And this next little thing, it's only a couple lines again. And again, it uses the parse function, the parse dialect, to go through a little bit of downloaded data. Now this URL is a data file in the exact format that PayPal uses. There's a bunch of lines on that page. If you go to the URL, you'll see it's a pile of data there. And we're going through for each of these lines at that file that's read from here. And this is, again, read directly in Rebel. You don't need any external libraries to do the reading. It's going through and it's looking for in each of these lines. The second item is converting it to a time and then performing a calculation on the time. If the time is greater than midnight or less than noon, it's printing out the 8th element in that row, which is a name. And so that's what we got with the example here. And you can actually go through the data file if you want to look and see that those are the rows. Actually print out the 8th element, which is an amount. So really quick and simple, easier, much easier and more reliable than using a spreadsheet, all just done in a couple lines of code. Okay, this next little example again uses a little bit of parse. Goes out to this application on guitars.org, which is actually written in Rebol. It displays the IP address of the machine. It parses that page and gets out the IP address from that page, and then it shows the internal address, which it can just read from using the internal networking capabilities. So here it shows us our WAN and LAN addresses, our external and internal IP addresses in the network. Okay, so this next little example is an image effect application. Again, Rebol has all this stuff built in. It has a huge pile of effects that can be applied to images. And again, this is an image that's downloaded from a URL. Bunch of sort of arbitrary effects that are applied. And then when you click on the effect, it allows you to change that effect on the image, or apply that effect to the image. So again, just a few lines of code, all of that networking, all of the user interface here, this text list, which provides the user interface, and all of the actual processing is done in just a couple lines of code. Okay, so this next application, it uses a password, so I've copied that and put my own username and password in. This little tool lets you connect to any FTP site. So if you have a web server and you want to be able to edit your files, you can type in your user and password information at your website, and this will go through and it provides a user interface to let you edit any of the files that are on your server. So let's go down here. Let's see, we'll run this FTP tool. So this is what this looks like. Get that to run. There we go. Opened a few of them here. And so this is actually going to my website of mine. I am going to click on that and actually show the this a little smaller. There we go. And so this is actually bringing up the file. You could edit this and save it back to the website. Let's see, a little smaller here, just so that my files aren't shown, my user information isn't shown. So I'm actually clicking right now on, like if I want to look at a folder, I can do that. And so I'm actually looking at, and I'm able to edit and save as a fully functional editor. It allows me to look at what's on the server and then edit that live and save it back to the website. And all of that is done with just this little tiny bit of code. Okay, and I did the same thing here. I'm going to run this next Echo clipboard application. You can see what this is doing is pasting. I managed to copy and paste all of that text. Now see, what this is going to do is give me a running, if I copy this, it's going to give me a running list of anything that I edit. So here, let's just copy a little bit from here. So if you see, I control, and what this is doing is running to a file. Control C, and it's saving that. So I've used this to do scraping of websites if I wanted to copy a whole bunch of text from a website. And again, just a couple lines of code. Really just a few lines of code. Open that up. That's the entire application that does that. Let's keep going here. This little paint application, the wave file application. So what this does, let's run it. Somewhere in the background here, I've got a, close all these. I've already got this running. So there we go. I'm going to close down this application. It's going to continue to run. Do our F5 again to run it from there. And I don't know if you can hear that on the microphone, but it's playing each of these things. And it allows us to select a directory if we want and play any files that are in that directory. This little directory selector is built into Rebol also. Okay, and so the next thing here is a paint program. And so this sort of demonstrates really quickly the draw dialect that's built into Rebol. It lets you create graphics. Draw is extremely powerful. We're going to see some, we'll see, like, for example, some 3D applications that are created using Draw exclusively. But this is just a simple little application to show, you know, what it looks like. I'm going to save this image as a file. You can give it its file name, draw something else, and give it another file name, and that's saved to the hard drive. There we go. Just to click that on. Again, that little paint program and the wave file jukebox are all really short applications, and there's nothing else that needs to be done. You write that code. You don't need an IDE to do any of this. The code is so simple that it's just quick to do. I'm going to run a little server here. Let's try and run this as it is. Let's see what we get. Sometimes this little server is down, so I have my own little video server. Let's give it a try. I'm going to run F5, and yeah, the video is down currently. And what I'm going to do, let's try this again. Go through all these here. I'm going to run this again. We're going to run a server somewhere on this machine. I installed a little server that will let us pick up the video from the camera. And if I can't find it, we may just skip this one. Yeah, you may just skip this one and come back, but it's a really interesting example because it actually displays the video from the camera, and it's a total of approximately what is this, maybe 5 lines, 6 lines of code. So this little example lets you set the URL, which we could set to any system anywhere that's providing images, and then it creates a little layout, and this little engage function allows us to wait a certain amount of time, which we're going to set to 0, and then just refreshes the image that's loaded from the URL. We can actually get real-time video. It's fast enough. And unfortunately, it looks like I don't have that program installed on this system to do the video serving, but you can use that with any of the URLs. You can go onto Google and find a URL that provides video. Yeah, it looks like I have this on another machine, so we're going to skip that. If this server was up and running right now, you'd see the video live from that camera. Well, let's move on and go to the next one. Same thing here. this just demonstrates a bit of the email functionality. You can set all of the SMTP and POP server information, your username and password, and this little bit of code down here creates the user interface that allows us to send email. So we'll go through that one too, since we need to connect to a server. Okay, this one is actually really interesting. I'm going to run this one. This is a fully network-enabled messenger program. So I'm going to copy that and run that in a separate instance of Rebol down here. So we have two of these programs. Now, what's important about this program is that it's sending the information across a network. So you could run this on two separate machines that are on a network, and you can see it automatically finds the IP address. It's built into the code. You send one of these as server and another as the client. It looks like I might have another one of these running, so let's do this again. Get rid of all the rest of these here. And we'll run one version. And then we'll run another copy of this exact same thing. Now we have two versions of this. One is set as server, and one is set as client. And I can type, and this is just a little network messenger. If you look now at both of these, they are sending messages back and forth. I type in one, and it appears in the other. And again, this is a total, including all of the code to create the application, a total of just a few lines of code. And this works across the network. This is actually a working network application. That data from here is being sent through a network port over there, and it takes all of this code to create that entire application with some error checking and so forth. And it shuts down properly. And so this next little application is, just run this again, is another network-enabled app. And what this does is it creates a server. This is not using Apache or any other third-party software. This is all done, again, it's entirely created with those few lines of code. You can see we're opening a network port, but then we're opening the browser at the localhost because we're serving this on localhost. But you could, if you're on another machine, if you wanted to run this on the web, this is a fully functional web server. Printing a little bit to get some information back, and then we're running a loop to constantly run the server, and you could connect thousands of machines if you wanted to do this and collect information from them. Most of this code is just HTML that's being served, but it is actually printing what's entered into the user interface in the browser. So this is the browser. So if we type some things into the browser, and you can see that's being sent over the network from the browser, type some random stuff here, into the Rebol program. It's all entirely Rebol. There is no third-party application anywhere doing this. The only thing we're using on the system is the web browser, and that could be any web browser. So you could use an application like this to collect data from people in a room or on the web, and this little server will handle many tens of thousands of connections comfortably. Okay, so let's go on here. Okay, so the next application is a game, and this game uses the control, or not the control key, the space bar to control a little paddle at the bottom of the screen, and some images which are built into Rebol fall, and this gradually speeds up. It's got a sorted high score table which automatically runs when you're done. let's run this a couple times in Rebol. I'm going to copy and paste that directly into Rebol Interpreter. So we can see the high scores run. And you can see here, I can use my spacebar to go back and forth, and there, the window is bounded, so it automatically stops at the side. I'm going to let this run. Once more things drop, then get saved, the game is over. And so I'm going to put my name in here, and you're going to see the top scores are saved in sorted order. And that's all done in just a couple lines of code. Let's run that again. Do F5 here. Catch a couple, and then we'll let a couple drop here. And you'll see this does speed up. You can see that the scores are sorted. And we'll go on with the next example. This next example is just a really simple, straightforward CRUD. Create, retrieve, update, and delete application. So, typical kind of database application. And it's got a bunch of error checking in these few lines of code. So, if I try to load a file that's not there, it won't crash. I've done some things here. It automatically goes to the first field whenever you do anything. I'm not worried about what I'm typing here. I'm just going to type in some data and then save it. And let's create another entry here. These could be names, or they could be this could be a contacts list. This could be a favorite videos list. It could be anything. And you can see if I bring these up now, I've got those entered. I'm going to delete this. And I put a little feature in here. You have to right click on this because I didn't want to accidentally delete things. If you hold it and right click, it'll delete. Okay, so you see that's been deleted from the list. I can bring up anything, any of these files, and edit them. Let's create another one. And another one. And you can see if I bring up a file that's already been created, so I want to edit that. There's some code in here that determines that's already been created, and it doesn't save a new one. It just edits that particular file. So if I go back and save that again, you can see the next time I bring it up that it's only editing and not creating a new one. And there's a little raw option here. Let us, if we wanted to, I wouldn't put that in the user interface, but just to show you, you can bring up that editor and edit the actual raw data files. Okay, so the next example here is another little draw example. What it's doing is, this one more time. What it's doing is taking an image, again a built-in image, this logo.gif, and it's drawing that image onto this little black box and contorting it to fit into these spaces. So you can see Rebol's draw dialect is extremely powerful. We'll have a lot more interesting draw examples as we go along, but there's that example. Okay, now this example was to show that you can connect with libraries on the system and how easy it is. This is actually a voice over IP intercom. So I'm going to just connect to myself here, localhost. And maybe you can hear in the background. Everything that I say is sent back to myself. I'll get a little echo there, but that little application. I'm going to turn that off now. That little application, again, is just a few lines of code, and that's doing quite a few things. It's, of course, dealing with the sound. It's using a a built-in DLL in the Windows operating system to record sound, and this is how simple it is to connect with the API of that little DLL. And this is actually creating two separate programs. We're writing some code to another file, and so each of the users has a recorder and a receiver, a sender and a receiver program, which is handling all this sending of the information back and forth. And you can see we're opening a network port and sending that recorded file back and forth. And it even does some squelching here. If it's too quiet, it won't send the file, so we don't get constant network activity. So it's actually a pretty complex example. Again, just a few lines of code. I don't think there's even 15 lines of code there. And so here's a little simple encrypt and decrypt. We can choose a file. Let's choose maybe a data file that we had from before. This was the data file that was created by that little CRUD app, and we'll encrypt that file. It's going to ask us for a name. Let's maybe create a new file here called DD. Let's save that, and then if we want, we can open up that same file. I managed to do something wrong here. Once again. Oh, I see why. Yeah, we opening up DD, and we'll put in our password and decrypt, and that shows us the file. If we look at that actual file, let's look at that actual file, the DD file, which is just encrypted. Let's open that and look. You can see that's in a encrypted format. It's relatively secure. Now, this is the simplest possible encryption scheme that you can use. We have like a little encloak function. We'll hide that data from prying eyes. Rebol has a lot of the industry standard security features that allow you to encrypt using standard formats. But you can see it's really simple to do. Okay, so we're on to the next example here. Let's go on. This is a little guitar chord diagram maker, but it could be a guitar chord diagram maker, or you could use this to make ukulele chords or bass diagrams. And you can set the number of frets. It tells us here to right-click the chord name to save an image, and so this lets us just kind of click on frets and strings. And if we want, we can put a character anywhere. If we want to put letter names or numbers or anything else here, we can click on this to save the chord name. Let's save that as an F chord. And if we right-click on it, it'll let us save this to a file. We take that file name, and so it makes it really simple and easy for us to create chord diagrams. There's another program later in these examples which lays these diagrams that we create out into a nice layout that you can save as a single image and send to people. Okay, so we created a couple images there, and again, just a few lines of code. All of that, all the saving routines, all the drawing routines, everything is in just those few lines of code. So, close that one. This is a, it says simple encrypt utility because that was the title that was currently at the top when I ran this set of programs. But if you run this here, we'll see, again, it uses the title of whichever is put in the that little title section. Okay, so we're going to run this little cash register, and hammer for $12. Let's say nails. Let's say $5. And you can see it's calculating the subtotal amount, the amount of tax, and the total amount. We can save that to a file, and then we come around and do another one. And And we'll save that one. Now the next little example here is a report that shows us how much money was collected from the register during the day. So that's our total sales for the day. This next little example is a full screen presentation. Shows you just how easy it is to actually lay out screens. There's another slide in the screens, and here's a little screen that takes up only part of the screen and doesn't have a title header on it. And let's just take a look at some of this code here. Here's the full cash register application, and it's got a bunch of error checking and make sure that the money value is put in where the money is checked, and all the calculations for the total. Here's our little daily cash register report. Goes through each of the items on a given date. In this case, I wrote the code to just get the current date, but you could, of course, do all sorts of processing. You could check the name, for example, if you wanted to run a report for a name, if you wanted to see how much sales tax was due. It would be the same code. You just change these little lines about conditionally doing things. And that screen presentation that you just saw, you can see it's as simple as can be. This is the actual built-in dialect that we use to create interfaces, user interfaces. So if you want to put an image, use the word image. If you want to put some text, use the word text. If you want to put a black box, you got box, black, and the size. And this just creates a screen that's the size of the screen. It creates a window that's the size of the screen. Then here's the next little window that come up, and same kind of thing. We've got some gradients and color effects. You can see it's very easy to apply gradients to anything. You can apply gradients to graphics, or you can apply gradients to buttons or images, anything else that you can imagine. And there's the code that actually runs through the slides. Just for each of the slides in that list up here, goes through and views them. So very, very easy to create layouts. This next little example is just another CRUD app, sort of like a Rolodex. Save and load. Again, with some checking, and brings those back up. Just a different way of doing a CRUD app. This one is one that uses a library called RebGUI, which it downloads. See right there, downloads that RebGUI library. Creates a file, and you can see I've got some. The nice thing about RebGUI is it has a lot of features that aren't included in the default user interface set of components that's provided with Rebol. That's called VID. The VID, the default way we create user interfaces in Rebol. That's built in, but there are a bunch of these third-party user interface libraries, so you can use libraries very easily, and they're tiny. This I think is about 30K to download, and it's great for building business apps. Has more of the features that you'll see in business apps, and so one of the little controls in here is a table control, which you can of course resize and sort columns as you would expect. Sort by that column's order. I'm going to delete here one of these items, and then this one automatically on close saves the file. And there's another example down the road here which uses that interface and actually has a networked, fully multi-user network connected version of this. We'll get that to in a bit. This is a little music app, a little sound app, and what it does is it downloads this wave data, which is a bunch of sounds that I recorded on the guitar for chords, and it plays them. So what it's going to do is play if you can hear that on the microphone, it's playing these chords. E minor and G7. Okay, and to show you that this is all actually done in code, let's type in a couple chords. G, E, and then E, E, like a F sharp or a G flat, and you play those. D, there's the G flat, and then it repeats D, G. And you can change the speed by changing the delay between the chords. And there's a little interface here that allows us to save any chord progression we've typed in up here and load it back in. Okay, so this is another draw example. This is the next thing here. These are just kind of running as I close one, the next one opens up. I said that the draw dialect is very powerful. I'll give you an idea of that here. So as I move this little 3D dialect, you can see these are this is done by using built-in native draw commands. This is a library by a guy named Andrew Hoadley, and what he does is this would be much faster because I'm actually printing out each of the draw commands as they go. See, I'm using these sliders to actually print out the draw commands that makes this entire scene render. So that little thing here, let me get back to this. That little thing, entire 3D example, is all contained in this code. So you can see you can adjust the the various camera angles and the actual model, the cube model, and you've got these little sliders down here. So here's the user interface, and here's all the code that we need to do that 3D stuff. It's pretty fantastic little example of how powerful draw is. Now this next example was running down here. This kind of shows you the draw dialect itself that's used to create some 3D stuff. There's no library in this one. This is just pure Rebel code, and you can see I've created some images using that logo GIF again in some boxes, and put them into a cube shape, which bounces around on the screen. I'm going to take that and I'm going to put that directly in the Rebel interpreter so you can see this run a couple times, and it's going to, as I click, whenever I actually touch a Rebel logo, you can see the score goes up. If I click over here, it doesn't do anything. If I actually touch the Rebel logo, only if I'm touching the logo, it goes up. And the point here is to get as many possible clicks. So you can see it speeds up as I go. So we can run that, try and get the high score, and I think we have like 30 seconds or a minute or something like that to do this, whatever we set the time as in the code. So you can see this is again rendered entirely in draw code. So you can see how fast draw can operate. We're rendering these 3D these images in 3D using draw code. Okay, so that's where we were, and that's more typically like what you'll see in other languages. But one of the really great things to realize is that Rebel is made to make dialects easy, and that little 3D dialect is I think is a fantastic example. We have our own built-in dialects that come with Rebel. Get rid of some of this stuff. But it's very easy to create other dialects. There are some really fantastic examples of dialects that have been created with Rebel. There is a Flash dialect that actually creates Flash apps using a Rebel dialect. And there's a PDF dialect, and there are a bunch of other dialects. Some GUI dialects, and there are web framework dialects, and there are all sorts of anything that you can imagine doing with a computer, and the interface to doing that sort of work is made easier by using dialects that help you interact with those types of operations more easily, more naturally. And that's one of the reasons why Rebel code tends to be so small, because we have a bunch of these built-in dialects that let us do a lot of things, for example, like creating GUIs. And Rebel's built-in GUI is clearly old. This is almost 20 years old, but it's an absolutely fantastic demonstration of what can be done with dialecting. And I've got a lot more about that at the at the links that I've provided. But it's one of the things that hasn't really been addressed so well by other or even at all by other languages. We tend to think of programming as involving functions and objects and data structures, and those tend to be brittle and wordy compared to what can be done by the use of dialects. So it's one of the really key things. Our parse dialect, for example, that's built into Rebol, does a better job of parsing data in a more readable way than you can accomplish with regular expressions. So there are a lot of these examples that already exist, and Rebol is just absolutely ripe for the creation of new dialects. And if you look at what's going on with Red, which is sort of a new version of Rebol that will run on operating systems and is compiled, and which gives access to much lower level capabilities, is really exploring some of these new directions. And the productivity benefits are absolutely dramatic when you can use a well-defined and well-created dialect to do the common things that you see in computing. So that's something to really look into if you want to study Rebol. And it's described on that page, Why Rebol. I think that's a good place to start if you're an experienced developer and want to understand what Rebol really has to offer and why it's so productive. Okay, so here's a little hangman game. It's cute. Simple as doing the drawing. And one of the neat features about this is that it creates the words. A couple lines here. Creates all the words using built-in words that are found in Rebol. So there's not a list of words in this. It's just creating them as we go. Let's see if I can... Ta-da. And it looks like that ran. So I'm going to do this next thing. This is a jigsaw puzzle creator. And it lets us pick a little F chord we created before, divide it up into 4 pieces. And here I'll press the space bar to show me the original image. So we've just got a little tiny thing here. It looks like that's going to go there. It lets us drag and drop this stuff around the screen. Let's see here. Oops. Back on the screen. This is a little tiny image, probably not the best one to demonstrate this with, but there we go. You can see that it recognizes when the image matches the original image. Okay, so enough of that one. That one's a little bigger example. There's a lot going on in there to actually do the image processing. And here's another one that I think the takeaway from looking at these examples is that because we don't need a GUI builder to build GUIs, we're not even using graphic draw routines here. We're just using code that actually creates a user interface. So you can see I'm going through columns here and appending them to a layout called G, which then I just view later on. So I can really quickly create a dynamic interface very easily. So here, if I want to choose the number of columns in this memory game. And so on. So I can make this any other size. Let's actually do that. Run that again. And we could resize this. And it resizes. Oops. Resizes. I'll make this maybe 4 by 4. And you can see it resizes appropriately for the screen. And so on. Okay, we're getting an error here because the next example is a CGI application. So Rebel has all these CGI capabilities built in. I'm going to get rid of this app. And what we're looking at now is this little application you put on your web server. So this is made for running on an Apache web server. And it's a typical CGI application. It prints out some headers and prints out some HTML. And this particular thing is going through a folder, whatever folder it's put in, looking for files that have file extension names, and then adding them to the HTML, and then printing the HTML, and also printing out a count. So if you want to see that run, you can go to, let's see here, it's going to be rebol.com/photos. Photos.cgi, and that prints out whatever is in that folder. These are all the images in that folder, and then prints out a little total. So that's the code that makes that happen on the web server is right here. Okay, now we've got another little example. This is another example that's installed already at rebol.com. Little tiny bit of code. Let's go to that one. Oops, which is chat.cgi, and you can see we can interact with the application there. So I can type in a name, type in a message, and there we've got a new added message there. And this little application, the next one, again we have a username and password in here, and a few lines of code lets us interact with that exact same file on, let's see here, on the desktop. So this is a desktop application that lets us interact with that same data file, so we can send and receive messages and get those exact same messages So if I go back to the website now and refresh it, you'll see that that message I just typed into the user interface on the desktop interacts with this web app, and very, very simple to do. This next app just shows how, again, you can interact with third-party DLLs. Here's a little file that's provided by the United States Postal Service to provide tracking and routing information and to create a string, a mail-encoded string. So let's go ahead and run that. And this also does the downloading. So if that file isn't on the computer, it downloads it from my little site here and runs it. Let's see here. Oh, you know what? Again, that's in a place. Let's see. Trying to find it. Okay, so let's just take that code really quick and create it here. Cut it and paste it. Create a new file. So this is as easy as it is to actually work with this stuff. We'll call this mail. And again, I don't need any IDE to do this, just a text editor. I'll call this mail.r so that it runs automatically. And I'm just going to open that with my text editor, paste in the code, and run it. And you can see it's downloading that file. Let's just put on a tracking and routing number and prints out. So that work of creating the encoded message is done by the DLL that's provided by the U.S. Postal Service. So you can interact with external files like that. A couple other library examples here. This is a data grid library. This is something I've created. Rebel has a built-in grid control, or they're called styles and controls, or the gadgets that you use in your GUI, in your graphic user interfaces. They're called styles in Rebel, but there's a style in Rebel for dealing with grids of information, tables of information, and this is just a customized little thing I download here. Customized little grid tool that lets you really easily put in columns of data and rows of data with some headers, and it allows you to do all sorts of things like sorting and changing and deleting and moving and all sorts of things with that data. So here it creates, again, you have column headers that can be sorted, and you can, on this screen it's a little hard to do, but you can readjust the size of the columns. It's got a certain, make some changes to that. It's really easily editable, and it saves us in a data format that's intuitive to Rebel. Lets you reset the data. All sorts of little features, some resizing features in here. That little library does a lot. There's another, this is called the QPlot library. Creates all sorts of different charts. So that's a little example of the QPlot library. That little bit was done. This first line just downloads the QPlot library, and this is all pure Rebel code. There's no external code here. These libraries are pure Rebel files. So basically all of that charting is done with that little couple lines of code. This next example is another parse example. It basically just, if you can see, there are some URLs in the text here, and what it does is it goes through and it creates a HTML link for everything that's found to be your URL. Okay, so this next example, again, this uses some passwords, so I'm going to just kind of end that one, and I've got that put in. This is sort of my replacement for Dropbox. In my life, I have to give people files all the time, and so I wrote this little tiny program. This gets used every single day. I have several different versions of this, and what it does is it allows me to use a web server, or an FTP server, to instantly create new user pages and upload files to user pages for people. So I can give them a URL once, which is usually their last name, at my server, and it creates a file list for them in HTML. So let's see, there we go, file share application. There we go. Okay, so you type in the user's name, and it lets you select whatever file. Let's send the chat and the blogger file up to John's page. You can see it's uploading it, and then it lets me actually, I had previously uploaded some things, I can edit their file. So if I, for example, want to delete some things that were there previously, and it's creating a link to each of those, and then it shows them the page. So now I can go to get those files, and I can give them their little URL on my site, and every time I want to send files to them, I've created a bunch of these. Every time I want to create a let me break that one here really quick. Anytime I want to set them another file, or if I want to send a file to another person, for example, say I want to create a page for Joe, all I have to do is type their name in and upload, again, whatever files I want to appear on their page. It can be anything. Come on here. And send. Now it's uploading those to their page, and I can edit their page, and then I get their page. And so anything that I ever want to send people is very easily done. I don't have to set up new pages for people. I just type their name in and select the files. And so for me, it's like having a new Dropbox account for any number of people. So with all the clients I deal with, this little program gets used constantly. And again, a few lines of Rebel code. This next little thing is just another to-do list. It's got some more features, so you can type in we'll just type in some random things here. It lets us, this is just an example to show you how to sort and move around files in a series, in a list. So for example, I can take that file and move it up, move it down, sort it alphabetically, can delete an item, and so on. I can also load and save the file. And this little print option shows you how to do a screen capture. So that actually, you can look here, this is actually an image, a screenshot of the image. So for example, the idea here was if you wanted to make a to-do list and send the image of your to-do list to somebody, really easy to do. And again, all that code, here's the line that creates the screenshot. Just use the function toImage, and that is creating an image of the text list, and then it's browsing that file. It saves it to a PNG file and then browses that file. So very, very easy to do these things. This also demonstrates a different way of creating the GUI and interacting with the GUI. Here we create the layout, but we don't actually view it yet. We view it down here. This lets us do some things that we can't do otherwise. I use that sort of layout a lot in creating games. Okay, this next example is a UDP chat application. So the last chat application you saw was just a couple lines. That used TCP for the transfer protocol. This uses UDP, and we're multicasting this. So the really great feature about UDP, and again, this is built into Rebel, and you can interact with any UDP application, created in another language. So I've done this, to work with Android applications that I've created using other development tools. Same thing with the text messenger, or, file transfer tools. Yeah, these are great for transferring data between machines. And of course, you could use this exact same code on any other operating system that Rebel runs on, and it runs exactly the same. So what this does is it creates a little chat application which does not require a server. In all the other TCP apps, you remember before we had to set one of the applications as server, and you have to know the IP address. So that typically means if you're in a building, you have to go, what's the IP address of the server? Or you have to create another way of transferring that IP address between the users. This eliminates that requirement, and lets you get in here. Let's do this again. And now you can see when I type, I save that. Let's try this again. There we go. And anybody that gets on, even if the system doesn't know the IP address, will just receive these messages. And I have a little help message in here. It'll tell you can press Control+U to see whoever's online, and that'll broadcast a message out to the application. Whoever's running it, their application will say their username is online and broadcast that back out to the group. So a fully featured standalone kind of network application that doesn't require any IP addresses. I have a whole tutorial about these next couple examples. Basically what these do is they allow you to create applications that don't need a database in cases where you generally would use a database. Because Rebel's networking capabilities are so strong, we can create a little server here that is running now, and this allows us to connect any of these clients. So here is this is that little typical like a context app that you saw previously, and this little tiny bit of code here is basically a framework that allows the server and the client applications to connect, so that multiple users, you could have a million users, connecting to this application so that no data is overwritten. And this lets us deal with the data, and there's actually some error handling here. It's a full framework basically for dealing with multi-user applications. And I have a whole tutorial that goes over this, so I'm not really going to talk about it much here, but this is incredibly powerful and lets you build really fine-tuned network-based applications that can deal with as many users as you need to connect. It also discusses how to create those same kind of applications with a web interface. So whether you're running a client that's running on a desktop or on the web or on a on a mobile platform, Android, you can do this and connect in any way. So I'm just going to run this and kind of show you. It's the same app that we had before, but now it's running in a networked mode. There we go. So you can see we have the same app, and I could run that same app on 100 other machines, and we'd never overwrite each other's data. And there's no database in use here. This is entirely Rebol. So you can very easily fine-tune the code that you're running. You don't have to rely on whatever your database server allows you to do. And because you're not using SQL, you can very easily use the same Rebol functions and the same Rebol data management routines that become very natural to more easily refine the way the application runs. You don't have to rely on a third-party system and a third-party language to interact with the data. This next application is just a little blogging system, and again, because it has username and password, I put that in a separate file here. We'll run it from that separate file. Let's see here. I'm going to resize this and then run the Blogger app. I'll try this again. Run the Blogger app, and let's just create a title. I'll call this test 2. Oops. Call this one test 2. And we'll put a link maybe to rebol.com. This on-screen keyboard is awkward. Rebol.com. And we'll select an image. Maybe we can find that image that we created before, the F image. If not, I'm just going to upload some other image. Here we go. That's one that we drew before. And some just random text here. So I'm going to spend a lot of time. Upload that. And that creates a new page on the blog. So you can see here's that little image that we drew. Here's the link that we've added to the page, and the text that we drew with the title that we just gave it. And right from the app, we can load the browser on that page, and we can also, if we want, edit the code. So you can see here that's the actual blog page code. Okay, so let's keep going here. This next little one, this is a layout printer for the guitar diagram maker that we had before. I'll let you select space between the images, how many diagrams you want on each line, put a background color, and then it'll let you select some files. So let's grab these few files that we have here. And add those. And then click the Save button, and we can call it whatever we want here. And it creates that file. And ta-da, there it is. There is the single image that was created by putting all those images together. And so if we had 200 images, we could have a little layout that would that would have, in the way we did it, have 4 images per line, and it would continue to just put those all onto one image. Just a quick little diagram printer. This next little bit of code shows all the notes that are in every single chord in the list. So it goes through all the minor triads, all the major chords, all the major sevenths, and so on down the list. And it's just a little looping program to demonstrate how that works. So that's this bit of code here. I'll get rid of these applications as we run them. So again, most of that program is the names of the chords themselves. And there's some formulas to describe how Rebol should find the notes. This little next thing that's running is a recursive file search. So you put in what you want to find in the files, select a folder, and it shows you which names have that text. The next little applications come up are all simple. This one allows you to select some dates, and it tells you the number of days in between those dates. 25 days. And you can see these are going back to a bunch of really short examples here. These are extremely simple programs. A couple lines of code. Few lines of code. This dinner tip calculator, I actually have this one down below as a single line of code. There are some one-line examples down here that we'll get to in just a minute, and this is one of them. So here, we type in what we want, and it gives us the tip. If we want to change the percentage, and that's all in what can be condensed down into a single line. So this next one lets us open a folder, and it just basically gives us a slideshow of all the images that are in that folder. And I managed to just I'm going through these here. Didn't intend. You know what we'll do here? I'll crash this. I'll go through the rest of the applications. So you can see the dinner tip calculator, the image slideshow, all just a few lines of code. This next one, again, is it's a very simple draw example. So you can see we're choosing a pen color, drawing a polygon, choosing a pen color, drawing another polygon again, doing all that inside a draw block, and then we're adding a gradient to that effect. And that's all put in a GUI, and the draw is applied to a little box. Let's run that and show you that. That's how you get that drawn graphic. And the coin flip app, again, just a few lines of code, downloads a couple images, and then does what's needed to flip that image. As you click on flip, it switches it between heads and tails. It gives you a interesting here. My finger's not working on the screen. There we go. Okay, and the next thing is a little tiny math test program. So you type in an answer, and it tells you if you're right or wrong. Yay. And if you type in the wrong answer, obviously it will this little thing goes through a list and creates compliments from the words they're given. $99 here on the wall. This shows us how to switch between different layouts, different things within the same layout. Just more little things here that we can use our user interfaces. These are all tiny little programs. And we've got single line examples here, which are easy to see a bunch of these single line things. There's FizzBuzz in a line. Here's the tip calculator in a line. So all of these you're seeing are single line applications. Each of these examples you saw at the end was and these one-liners, actually, if you look, they're split at 79 characters, so you can put these all on one line. There, for example, is a single line version of that. So you can, everything here you see indented can be put on the previous line. Here's one of my favorite ones. I didn't write this one, but it's a Morse code generator. Try this again. There we go. And if we run that in Rebel, we've got a few Rebels open here. It's okay because it's very small and lightweight. This is a Morse code generator, so it asks us to type in a message, and it prints that message out in Morse code, one line of code. Okay, so that pretty much demonstrates everything we need here. At the bottom of this page, you'll see some more links. You want to definitely check out the quick start tutorial. It goes through actually most of these examples, or at least 20 some of the examples. I have another link here that has a huge number of really big and complex examples that are covered in this book at businessprogramming.com. Also, be sure to go to rebel.org to see more. There are thousands of examples up there. I've got a couple hundred more examples up on rebel.org. A couple more tutorials you might want to read here. This great little tool that works with Rebel well for creating web apps. You might want to see my free consignmentsoftware.com site and read some more about other applications and businesses that run on Rebel, and hear about why they're why it's productive. And you can again read that article in the beginning if you're a developer and want to really understand why Rebel is different and why it really works differently to truly be lighter weight and more productive than other other languages. Take a look at this article, the Why Rebel article. It's it really covers the details of exactly what's different about Rebel, and it's dramatically different. It's a good read. Go through that, and you can see some more. You might want to read the Red Monk article and look at the videos by the owner of Atronics, and see how they've done incredible things in their industry using Rebel. But this is a little more detailed, objective description of why Rebel can really cut down on your time. It's not like other tools that you're familiar with. It's not like all these libraries and JavaScript tools and things that claim to be productive. Rebel from the beginning cuts out bloat and is dramatically different than other development systems. So if you have questions, you can go to the Rebel forum, and it's still a good community there running, and go through the links and see if it fits your interests.